So for our next presentations, we will have Dr. Thall and Dr. Xu. The title of the presentation is Evaluating Joint Effects of Induction-Salvage Treatment Regimens on Overall Survival in Acute Leukemia. Dr. Thall is also a professor in the Department of Biostatistics at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center. Dr. Thall started off as a Spartan, got his BS at Michigan State University. Then he became the Seminole for his MS and PhD at Florida State University. Dr. Thall is very prolific in the field. He pioneered the use of Bayesian methods in medical research. He published over 160 research papers and book chapters. 180? Sorry. And has designed over 300 clinical trials, 400 clinical trials. Data I got was outdated. So that's Dr. Thall. He will be followed in the same topic by Dr. Yanxun. She got her BS in Mathematics and Applied Mathematics from Beihang University in Beijing. Her MS is in Statistics with a minor in Economics at Texas Tech University. And her PhD was in Statistics, a joint program between Rice and MD Anderson. So she got an outstanding student scholarship and her BS. Math Graduate Scholarship for Excellence for MS, and also a John and Eileen Teacher Fellowship at Rice for her PhD. So now she's a postdoctoral fellow in the Division of Statistics and Scientific Computing at the University of Texas in Austin. So without further ado, Dr. Thall, and I'll be back to you.
So how does the camera work? Do I stand in one place?
You can.
Oh yeah. All right. Okay. So. Titles in blue, and the point of this is that people think of treatment as one thing. You get treatment A, or treatment B, and you get stem cell transplant, and maybe you get therapy later on. But that's not really what happens. What actually happens when physicians treat patients is they apply something called the dynamic treatment routine. And the prototype of it is observe, based on what you observe, decide how much treatment you give it, see what happens. That means you're observing again. Repeat. And so you get an alternating sequence of observations and actions. And each time you take an action, you take that action based on all of the information that you have so far. And so all of the information that you have so far includes your previous actions. Now, if you take the alternating sequence of actions and observations and extract the actions, that's called the dynamic treatment. That's what I'll be talking about today. That's what Yanxun and I will be talking about. We published a paper on this last year in Terraces B using, I guess, what you would call conventional Bayesian methods, at least conventional frequentist methods for the modeling. We use two different estimation methods. And then I thought, I want to see what happens if we use non-parametric Bayes. And that's where Yanxun and Peter Mueller and Yuan came in. And that's the second paper. Peter Mueller, Whitehead, and yeah. So, background of AML. What is AML? AML is, I guess I'll stick to my script over here. I'm including myelogenous syndrome, and I'll explain why in a moment. AMDS is a class of myeloid hematologic malignancies, essentially blood cancers or leukemias, that originate in the bone marrow. The reason that myelodysplastic syndrome is included along with AML, characteristically, when you see manuscripts written on it in the last decade or so, is that they discovered, in the early days, myelodysplastic syndrome was considered to be a disease that was not so bad because it was pre-leukemic, but they gave people things like Dalian or something to treat it. Then they found that that was not a very good idea, that what you really need to do is treat it as aggressively as AML, because if you don't, it's going to turn into acute leukemia. They began lumping them together. In any case, this disease is very easy to diagnose because the patients have too few normal functional blood cells, namely red cells, T cells, white blood count, and so on. so on, and far too many blastic or undifferentiated leukemic cells. There's a thing called hematopoiesis going on in every one of you right now, whereby the blastic or stem cells differentiate into different kinds of blood cells, and each one of them has a function in your body. You have right now roughly between 3 and 5% plastic cells in your circulating blood. The leukemic can present with 30%. Once you see that on the blood exam, you know right away you've got AML. It's rapidly fatal. The 5-year survival is not very good, and it varies tremendously with patient age, type of cytogenetic abnormality, and a few other variables. The goal in treatment is to kill the cancer cells and bring the patient's normal blasts, platelets, and white blood count back to normal functional levels. Now, one thing about the treatment is that the treatment is poison. The euphemism for this poison is that it's chemotherapy. The idea is when you give the patient poison, you kill leukemic cells, you also may kill normal cells, but you hope you don't kill too many. However, one of the aspects of this is that the treatment can kill the patient. And that's pervasive in all of oncology. The main oncology treatment modalities are cut, burn, and poison, namely surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. And now we've got immunotherapy, which is really sort of in its infancy, in addition to stem cell transplantation. But I don't have time to get into that. So, what are the stages of acute leukemia treatment? And here I'm going to speak exclusively about chemotherapy, because that's what was done for this data. So, the first therapy is remission induction. And the idea is you give them the chemo in order to achieve a CR, complete remission. And it's really a misnomer, but it's defined in terms of three quantitative variables. You want to get their blast or stem cell count down below 5%. You want to get their platelet count back to a functional level and their white blood count back to a functional level. So these three quantitative variables have to meet these three cutoffs in order for you to declare victory and say we have a CR. So the first thing is to get a CR, but if you notice my third bullet point, my last bullet point, achieving a CR and doing it quickly is a necessary condition for long-term survival, but sadly it's not a sufficient condition because patients can relapse. So they can achieve a CR, but then the disease comes back. And patients also can die in CR, which essentially means that the treatment's over. Okay, so the first two stages, the second stage is salvage therapy. So for salvage therapy, if the induction treatment doesn't achieve a CR, they say, well, the disease is resistant. We have to do something, let's give them something else. That's called salvage. Another possibility is that a CR is achieved, but then the disease comes back. We say the patient suffered a relapse, let's try something else. We give them salvage. So salvage can be given under two different circumstances, either for resistant disease or disease that's recurrent after CR. And it's usually something else, something other than the front line. Or it can be a different chemo, or in some cases, salvage is stem cell therapy. Another possibility is that if CR is achieved, you give them more chemo, known as maintenance chemo, to keep them in CR. Although we're not going to be talking about that sort of data, but that is done, however. Now, for this particular data set that I'm going to be talking about, it's not your data set. The patients were randomized. So the thing about randomization in statistics is that the way that you decide patients' treatment, in this case there were 4 arms to the trial. So imagine you flip a coin twice. If you get a head and a head, you give them the first treatment. If you get a head and then a tail, you give them the second. If you get a tail and a head, you give them the third. If you get a tail and a tail, you give them the fourth. That way each of the treatments has probability 1/4. So you're deciding what treatment to give the patient by flipping a coin twice. This idea may seem insane, but it is really the only way that we know of to ensure unbiased comparison of treatment effects. That's a whole immense topic, but having unbiased estimators is critical in statistics. If you don't randomize and you have observational data and you analyze it as if you had randomized, the answers that you get are very, very likely to be wrong. This is an immense topic, and I don't have time to get into it, but this was a randomized trial. So what were the 4 arms? Well, fludarabine with Ara-C. Ara-C is the slang term for cytosine arabinoside. And the acronym for this is FAI. The second arm was FAI plus something called all-trans-retinoic acid. The acronym is ACID. It's just vitamin A. And I'll get why add vitamin A to this chemo combination. The third arm added something called GCSF, or granulocyte colony stimulating factor, to the FAI. This is something that occurs naturally in the body and is added in order to get cells to reproduce. And the last arm gave both the ACTRA and the GCSF. Now, this is for the frontline treatment, so there were 4. For the salvage therapies, once we went through the data set, there were many different salvages. And therefore, in order to make progress, we dichotomized them into salvage therapies that either contained high-dose Ara-C or did not. If we didn't do this, we wouldn't be able to make any progress. And so we have 4 front lines and 2 salvages, and a schematic of the design in the trial, little arrows mean randomization. And if you look at it, you see this is a classical 2x2 factorial design. That is, the baseline is FAI, and if you go from left to right, you're adding ATRA. If you go from top to bottom, you're adding GCSF. And so this is one of the fundamental two-way layouts that you learn when you study experimental design and statistics. And so it was a good idea. We wanted to look at the effect of adding GCSF and the effect of adding ATRA compared to just giving the baseline of FAI with Ara-C, Irucin. Okay, now I should mention that the one most important component of any chemo for AML was Ara-C. Ara-C is the most successful thing that's been seen, but it doesn't cure the disease. We don't have a cure. So when we analyzed this way back in 1999, a bunch of us, the head Hall refers to about, I don't know how many people, we published it in Blood, which is a major journal in hematology. And our aim was to analyze the data in this design trial, in which we randomized like good scientists, to look at the ATRA effect and the GCSF effect and so on what? Well, survival, and in particular being alive and in remission 6 months later. So if the patient is alive and their disease is in remission at 6 months, we're happy. I.e., that's how bad the disease is. Or was in 1999. We did conventional analysis. We fit a logistic regression model with the probability of this event. We did Kaplan-Meier plots, which Ken Hess has told you all about. We did Cox model regression, and we did the standard things. And we did all this based on the simplifying assumption that the only things that mattered were the 4 frontline therapies. And as I hope I will convince you in a few moments, that was a pretty dumb thing to do. Because we didn't know that. The results of the analysis, now I'm switching to bigger type, this is like mixed media. Based on the analyses, the conclusions were that nothing was going on. There were no significant differences among the treatment arms in terms of probability of remission, event-free survival following CR, and so on, any of the events. The p-values were all very non-significant. Okay. So the motivation for the reanalysis was the fact that I noticed that just looking at frontline therapy is really silly. And Yanxun, did you hand out the little picture here? Did you? You already did. Okay. So if you gave you this picture, and this is a schematic and it's actually a simplified form of leukemia chemotherapy. And so this is a picture of the dynamic treatment regime. And there it is. So what happens, or what can happen? This picture is a picture of actions that the physician can take and events that happen in consequence of those actions, or I should say following those actions, depending upon how you think about causality. So here's induction therapy where it begins, and there are 4 of these. Now there are 3 arrows. The first arrow that goes up goes to death. So what happened is the patient died while they were getting their induction therapy. Their treatment killed them. And the time to that I call TD. I'm superscripting. The second thing that can happen is that you're giving them the chemo, but you can't get them into remission. You can't get a CR. And so at some point, the physician says, look, we can't get a CR. It's time to declare failure. That disease is called resistant. The third arrow goes down. This is the thing you're trying to do. It's the success event. So the times to these are TD, TR, and TC. And we have an indicator, Z1, that we scored 0, 1, or 2, just to keep track. Now notice that these three variables are what we call counterfactuals. They're counterfactuals in the sense that you can imagine observing them, but you only get to observe one of those three on the patient. For any one patient, you can observe TD, or TR, or TC. Simple? So if a patient is dead, they're dead, but if they're resistant, you can do things, and what you do is give them salvage. I'm going to call the first salvage here D1, and then you keep track of how long they live thereafter. I'm going to call that T super RT, the time from being resistant to death. If the patient goes into CR, two things can happen. They can die while they're in CR, and that happens because the chemotherapy beat the patient up so much that you achieve CR, but their organs were trashed and their immune system was trashed. Therefore, they had dysfunctional kidneys, or they got an infection because their immune system was beaten up, or a myriad of things could happen. And they ended up in the ICU and then they died. So this happens. Or they could progress, they could have progressive disease after CR. I mentioned this. You achieved the CR, but the disease came back, and now you give them another salvage. They're calling that D2, and we keep track of that with the time from progression to death. Now, ideally, what we would like is for this TC to be short. We'd like to get a CR a week or two, and this TCP to be 20 years. That would be a home run. That would be a cure. That's not what happens, but that's what the goal would be. So if you parse these out, you notice that there are 4 different paths to death. The first one is death during induction, TD. The second is death after being resistant, and the time to death there is the sum of these two transition times. The time to being declared resistant, and then the time from being declared resistant to death. Then the next one has got 3 summands. The patient achieved CR, the disease progressed, the patient died, so you add the 3 transition times. The fourth one is the lowest path, so that the patient achieved CR and then died. So the starting point of all this analysis was drawing this picture and writing down the random variables, which are the transition times, their random, and their indicators of what happens. You see, there's a Z1 for what happens in induction, and a Z2 for what happens after the patient achieves CR. So the T's and the Z's are outcomes, and the things that are controlled by the physician are induction and salvage. This is an example of a dynamic treatment regime. Dynamic treatment regimes have gotten tremendous attention in the last 10 to 15 years. The leader in this field is someone named Susan Murphy, who's at University of Michigan. She recently got the Genius Award, the MacArthur Award. She's the one that pulled me into the world of dynamic treatment regimes. And if she hadn't, I wouldn't have drawn this picture, and I wouldn't be standing here today. So, here's the first 3 analysis. I'm going to talk about this, and when I get done with that, then Yanxun will talk about the most recent analysis. There are many salvage treatments, so as I mentioned, we dichotomized them as to whether or not they had high-dose RC. This made sense to us because if we didn't, we couldn't make any progress. Moreover, the one thing that we know really works against AML is high-dose RC. It's obviously erbiticide. And we distinguish between 2 kinds of salvage. The salvage given early for patients whose disease is resistant, and the salvage given later on for patients whose disease progresses after CR. And so the 4 possibilities, so here are the 16 regimes. You got a frontline, a salvage, and a salvage after regression, I should say, or. So there were 4 possibilities for frontline, and the same 2 possibilities for the salvage after resistant and salvage after progression. Notice that I very cleverly have used different colors for them. So here's kind of a pinkish for high-dose RC and a green for others. It makes it kind of fun to see you play with color. So a dynamic treatment regime I can describe in shorthand as a triple A, B1, B2. This says what? Treat with induction therapy A. If the disease is resistant to the frontline A, give B1. If relapse occurs after achieving CR, then give salvage after B2. So this shorthand notation it identifies 3 treatments, 3 chemos, but it also has some rules that go with it. There's what to do with these things and when. Those are the regimes. And there's a total of 16 of these, and here's what they look like. So when you list them all out, there are not just 4 frontline therapies, which is the way we thought about it when we did our 2x2 randomized trial back in the late 90s. There are 16 regimes that can possibly be given. So in the modern world of medicine, I argue that what we should be evaluating is not just the first thing that you do in treating a patient. You should be evaluating the whole regime. That's a lot of work, but it's much closer to reality. How to do all this? Well, what we like is to estimate the mean survival time for every one of these regimes. And that's what we're going to do. Okay, so here's how we went about it statistically, and I'll give kind of a thumbnail sketch of all this. For every possible pathway, we had a lot of 4 different distributional forms, log, normal, and LIBOR, and all that. And we took the data and did goodness of fit analyses to decide, well, what's the best distribution? We also included age and cytogenetic categories, covariates, because it's very, very well known. Those are extremely strong predictors. You can think of prognostic treatment as an attempt to overcome the effect of prognostic covariates. If a 60-year-old patient with poor cytogenetics gets AML, they have a terrible prognosis. The question, that means they're likely to die soon. The question is, can your chemotherapy or your stem cell transplant or whatever you do overcome that? Can it overcome the effects of the fact that they've got the disease and have poor prognosis? Then we have the effects of previous transition time. So for at some point in that plot I gave you, if we're modeling a transition time, we include all the previous transition times. Don't waste information, as Sir Ronald Fisher said 100 years ago. And then we look at the effects of the treatment. So these are the dynamic treatment regime, or DTRs, the acronym, is the thing we're evaluating. So mean survival time was modeled as a weighted average of all of these 4 possible mean survival times and estimated for each possible regime. And we used 2 different methods that are the most commonly used methods in the world of dynamic treatment regimes. Both of them were invented by a fellow named Jamie Robbins at Harvard, who's the big genius who draws all this. This was done back in the 80s. The first is likelihood-based G-estimation, and Yanxun will be giving you a Bayesian version of that. And the other one is inverse probability of treatment weighted estimation, which there's a whole army of people that do that now. And the 2 methods gave the same conclusion. So here is a very simple formula for the overall mean survival under regime A, B1, B2. I'm going to call it theta. And this formula is obvious to the casual observer, as mathematicians like to say. I put this slide in just to convince you or point out that there was a tremendous amount of what I call statistical or probabilistic bookkeeping to turn that picture that I gave you into a mean survival time. And that's what this is. So if you've learned probability and you understand it, and you do all those things, you get a formula like this, and this is the thing that we're estimating. Okay, notice that it's got intervals and all of this other stuff. So I'm not going to dwell on it other than to point out that there's a very clever use of blue and green and red and yellow and so on, and Wyatt, Albus Wyatt is the one who did that. So I really enjoy his use of color. The maximum likelihood estimates of the overall mean. We estimated the component means from the assumed parametric models. Remember that the parametric models were determined by doing the goodness of fit and taking the model for each transition time that fit the data best. And then averaging the empirical, or these over the empirical distributions of the covariates. And so every one of these model fits depended on the patient covariates. And so after we got that fit, they were functions of covariates. we averaged over covariates to get a population. And then to get an estimated variability, we use the bootstrap. And so I'm referring to a lot of statistical techniques here. If you know what they are, good. If you don't and you're confused, then either you believe I'm clever or I'm just simply irritating you. But there's a lot of statistical technology that underlies all of this. Okay, inverse probability of treatment and sensory weighting. The IPTW method, inverse probability of treatment and sensory weighting, is the tool of choice for constructing unbiased estimators of regime-specific means. This is what is used for the most part in dynamic treatment regimes. G-estimation, however, is making a big comeback. And now I tend to use G-estimation, and so does one of the leaders in the field, called named Miguel Hernan, because we both think it works better. But we use IPTW, or here the T is missing. What you do to implement this essentially is you, first of all, given any regime, you identify the patients who receive treatments consistent with that regime, and then you weight the uncensored failure times using the censoring time distribution and the probability of following the regime, and compute the weighted average of the 4 failure times. That's roughly what we did, although obviously it's more complicated. Here's what we got. So after all of that and all the modeling and programming, here's the payoff. And the payoff for the 16 regimes, here are the IPW estimates, is an estimated mean with a 95% confidence interval. So what we're saying, for example, for this one here, for this row of the FAI plus ATRA as frontline, high-dose RSC is the first salvage, high-dose RSC is the second, is that the mean was somewhere between 400 and 600 days, and the 95% confidence interval went from the ADA. And then here's the MOEs. This really means the G-estimation. Notice that these give the same answer, but there's a shift. So while they're both bias correct, and they give the different numbers, there's a left to right shift, which we really couldn't quite explain. And some of the smartest people I've talked to still can't. They gave the same qualitative answers. Notice this cluster of 4 to the right. After all, what we're looking for are plots that move to the right. The law of the farther to the right it is, the happier you are. Who are these lucky people, or comparatively lucky people? They're the ones that got fludarabine, RSC, and the ATRA as frontline. Now, ATRA's got an interesting story, so I'm going to take a little sideline here. ATRA, all trans-retinoic acid. They discovered in China that if you gave ATRA to people with acute promyelocytic leukemia, it was a very effective anti-disease treatment. And so the people in the US said, well, the Chinese, who knows, they don't really know what they're doing. Let's do our own trial. And lo and behold, what the people in China had discovered was absolutely true. So ATRA, which is vitamin A, is in fact a very effective treatment for acute myelocytic leukemia. And in fact, this is what motivated the use of ATRA as part of this combination for AML. So acute promyelocytic leukemia is a particular subtype of AML. And so if you look at this a little bit harder, you see, well, let's see, if you got the high-dose RSC, the second one was what? What you get if you relapse after CR, those people seem to be surviving a little bit longer. But now remember, there's a lot of variability, and this, you notice that the credible interval, the confidence intervals all overlap. And this is common. This is what you see with dynamic treatment regimes. If you had a sample size, not 200 something, but 2,000, you get more large intervals. You don't get anything. We also did analysis excluding outliers, which gave the same answer. It's interesting what outliers are in survival analysis. In survival analysis, if you're in the data set, you would love to be an outlier. It means you survived a long time. Here are the final estimates. Now I've blown up the little picture. And so the question is, gee, what's the difference between these two? The difference is that the people who got the regimes in the lower blue box got the GCSF. The GCSF actually was a bit harmful. Probably what happened is it made the leukemia cells grow. At least that's what I believe, and I'm not even a lab. Here are estimates of the survival curves. These are just estimated survival curves, where green is black is the FAI plus ATRA with high-dose RC for both salvages, and the red, you get the high-dose RC only as the second salvage. And those are the winners, so to speak. So you see here, the FAI plus ATRA with these salvages does better than if you have the GCSF. These two curves migrate down and join the others if you get the GCSF. So what are the conclusions from all this? Well, first of all, what overshadows all of this is the notion that if we want to be grown-ups about this, we've got to look at reality as it is. The reality as it is that physicians don't just treat and then see what happens. They treat, see what happens, repeat. And so it's this alternating sequence of treatments and observations. Cancer therapy is multi-stage. And in fact, therapy of most diseases is multi-stage. You have an infection and they give you an antibiotic and it doesn't work, what do? They give you another antibiotic. And so on. The FAI plus ATRA followed by a high-dose RC at progression seems to be promising versus the other disease. These are not confirmatory results, certainly. The FAI plus ATRA followed by a high-dose RC or not for resistant disease seems promising versus the origin. Had we done this analysis way back in 1999, ATRA might have been studied further. So that's kind of the tragedy about this, is that we made the wrong conclusion. But one thing about it that kind of hurts me is that the ATRA dose and the schedule were never optimized. And so at a very deep level, and I haven't talked about it at all of these things were given at some dose and according to some schedule. You know, I've devoted about 20 years to figuring out methods to optimize dose or schedule of the two of them together. And what I see is instead of doing this optimization, what physicians do is they guess. They do these very crude dose-finding experiments with a small number of patients. And the point of it is this. Imagine that dose varies along this dimension and schedule that varies along this dimension. So dose and schedule live in a two-dimensional grid. And God has told us that the optimal dose and schedule is here. But actually God didn't, we just guessed. So we took the thing that we guessed, we went forward and did a great big trial. It's a bit silly. And I think that the reason a lot of trials are failures is not because the agents aren't any good, it's because they have not been properly optimized at the start. That's my little polemic about dose and schedule. Tailoring variables probably were used to choose salvage regimens, but those were not in the database. So there's additional information that we could have gotten that we didn't have, and I really wonder what those tailoring variables were that we used to choose the salvages. Could we do a more refined analysis? And then if you go deep into it, there are many possible molecular mechanisms for what could be going on between the ATRA and the cytotoxic agents. So, one point I want to note, let's take a sidestep and go across the pond, as they say, to England. The English always think they're smarter than we are. They're not. Milligan et al. Published a paper in Blood in 2006 where they had a 2 by 2 by 2 factorial design. So they read our paper and they did their own trial in the anything you can do, we can do better sense. And so once you got through it, they had twice as many patients. And basically what they did the trial like we did, but instead of using the fludarabine arachnotyrubicin, they randomized between these two other combinations. And when they got done with their whole great big, Me Too trial, as I call it, they concluded for quote, neither the addition of ATRA nor GSF demonstrated any difference in the CR rate, relapse rate, disease-free survival, or overall survival. I'd say it in a British accent, but my British accent isn't very good. I just love the English. Anything you can do. Okay, but unfortunately, they were as stupid in 2006 as we were in 1999. If you read their paper carefully, they ignored salvage treatment. Quote, following completion of the induction schedule, patients could proceed to stem cell transplantation, further consolidation with high-dose therapy, or other therapy at the discretion of the patient's clinician. Aside from the arrogance of this statement, it shows implacable ignorance. And so the tragedy is they did the trial a second time with slight elaboration in England, got the same conclusions, doing things the wrong way once again. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Yanxun because she's not really smarter than I am.
Thank you for his nice presentation. I think now you have a clear view of our clinical background, motivation, and the data. So our ultimate goal is to find the best treatment regime that can give us the longest expected mean survival time. So my part will focus on how to estimate the data, the mean survival time. So to estimate the data, we have two possible methods, like different views. The first is called Acute level, and the second is the estimation. So using this big formula, to estimate the data, so we first need to estimate for each transition time the expected mean survival time. So how to estimate this data more accurately? So Peter and Dr. Wang, they did the first reanalysis of this data set. So for each transition time, they fixed the accelerated failure time regression model, the EFT model, for each transition time. EFT regression model is very simple. It includes two parts. The first part is just simple linear regression of all the covariates, and the second term is the error curve. So when we assume different distributions on the error curve, we have different distributions on the survival time. So they tried 4 different distributions, whether exponential, log logistic, and log normal distributions for the log of the survival time. And they chose the distribution with the smallest Bayesian information criteria, PIC. And then after they get the regression model for each transition time, they plug in these models to the large G formula and then average over the empirical distribution of all the covariates. However, is this parametric model good enough? We have several concerns. First, what if the underlying data do not follow the assumed distribution? We know in this case, this model will fail. And the second concern is, this model is totally dependent on our observed data. So it's only for this specific trial. For each transition time, they choose the best distribution with the smallest PIC. So if we choose other criteria, we will get different best distribution. So it would be better for us if we can develop a more general model, and it can be applied in a more general scale. So to overcome these limitations, Peter and Dr. Wahet and my postdoc advisor Dr. Nora and I, we took out a new model. It's called the Bayesian non-parametric model. Okay, so I think maybe most of the audience are not from the STEM background, and maybe you don't know anything about the non-parametric Bayesian. So today I promise no technical detail, and I want to give you general idea of what's the non-parametric Bayesian. And if you are interested, you can study it at my talk. So first, I give you a simple example. So usually when we have some observed data, yi, and when we want to start to analyze the data, we usually first assume the observed data follows some distribution f. So for example, we can assume f follows some normal distribution, and this normal distribution has an unknown parameter data. And then we have some phi on the data, and we draw the inference on this observed data. And we call this kind of model as a parametric Bayesian. So here's a hypothetical example. We have some observed data set, and we plot the histogram. And here the red curve is the estimated density. We use the normal distribution with unknown mean data, and then we do some efficiency method, and we get the posterior estimated density. So is it good enough? So we can in this data they have two peaks. So clearly, only we assume one normal distribution is not good enough to get the density of this data set. So we can propose a non-parametric Bayesian model. So what's non-parametric Bayesian? So this here we assume the observed data follows a normal distribution. But in most real world problems, we don't know the exact distribution the data follows. So if we don't know the exact distribution, we can assign a distribution on the distribution. And then we do, based on the observed data and some estimates method, and we can get the posterior estimate of this distribution. But the distribution we don't know, so we don't have the exact distribution. We have a distribution on the distribution. So we apply the non-parametric Bayesian method on the same data set. So you see here, this little box here, it can cover this small peak. So I think our non-parametric Bayesian is formulated better than the parametric model. So the definition of the non-parametric Bayesian is if F is a random distribution. So F we don't know the exact form. So if F is a random distribution, then the model we call it non-parametric Bayesian model. So the enriched flow size DT is the most popular non-parametric model. So here I give you the constructive definition. So G follows the DP prime. So we can say it's a mixture of some point mass. So here direct is a point mass function. And we join some independent samples data H from a known distribution G0. So in non-parametric Bayesian context, we call this G0 as the base matter. And we randomly sample some points from this matter, and then we from this distribution, we generate some weights. So here I will give you an illustration. So first we have some matter. So here it's a normal distribution. And then we randomly sample points from this distribution, and then we get a mixture of these points. So we call this process as a derivative process. So from this figure, we can clearly say that the DP is a gives us discrete distribution. So since DP gives us discrete distribution, it would be awkward if we apply this model to the data if the underlying distribution is continuous. That's a survival function in our application. So one possible way to mitigate this limitation is we add a convolution with a continuous kernel to the DP. So this idea is very similar to the kernel density estimation. For this kernel density estimation, we have observed the data and we know the empirical distribution is discrete. And then we smooth the empirical distribution using adding a convolution with some continuous kernel. So here I take normal distribution as an example. So this kind of convolution model in non-parametric Bayesian we call it derivative process mixture model, DP mixture. So DP mixture here is very simple. It's actually a mixture of an unlimited number of some distribution. Here are still normal distributions. It has been proven that the mixture of normal distribution can approximate any absolutely continuous distributions. So this DP mixture model will have a large support under large classes of distributions. So now we have a very nice model, it's a non-parametric model, and how to incorporate the covariance. So for each patient, we have two possible covariates. The first is baseline covariance. For example, like patient's age, weight, or blood pressure kind of covariance. And the second kind of covariance is history. That means if a patient after the induction therapy, this patient experiences resistance, and then we observe this patient from the resistance to that. So for this patient, the time from induction to resistance will be the history. So how do we incorporate this covariance in our DT mixture model? That's the model we propose in this project. We call it the dependent derived process model, DDP model. So essentially, it's a mixture of normals. And we'll assume here, we add the covariance here. So we assume our model is a mixture of normals. And the mean of each component, we assume it's a function of the covariance. So the last question, how to model the mean of each component. So how to estimate the mean of each this normal distribution? Here the answer is simple. We use a Gaussian process prime. So the definition of the Gaussian process is in Gaussian process we have unlimited number of points, and for any finite set of the points, these points will follow a mathematical Gaussian distribution. So it's very simple, just Gaussian distribution. And we assume that this mean follows a Gaussian distribution with the mean mu and the covariance function C. And the mu function will just a simple linear regression of all the covariance. And the covariance function we use it's called the negative exponential covariance function. It's the most popular covariance function in the Gaussian process. And here I show several simple examples. So each figure shows the realizations of Gaussian process with zero mean and different covariance functions. So you can say this covariance function, they show the dependence between the covariance. So for different x, and they have different dependence structures. So to summarize our model, we propose a DDP-GP model for the mean survival time data. And our observed data is YIK. So here, K is the index of each condition time, and I is the patient. So YIK is the case condition time of patient I, and X is the covariance of each patient. And we assume the log of the survival time follows the distribution F, and we impose a phi on F. So F is a DDP-GP phi. And here mu is a simple linear regression of all the covariance, and the C is a covariance function in the Gaussian process, and alpha K is the phi of DDP, so it determines at how many mixtures. Remember our DDP-GP model, it assumes a mixture of infinite number of normal distributions. So here alpha gives us the information like how many mixtures can integrate the data. And the beta HK is the coefficients of each covariance, and the sigma K is the error, is the noise. Okay. So here's our model. And the next part is our show off time, which is simulation. With the simulation, our model is always better than alternative models. So we conducted 3 simulation studies to evaluate our DDP-GP model. The first simulation, here we don't consider the treatment effect. Here we only test if our model can perform well on the survival regression. So in this simulation, we consider 4 scenarios. So the first 3 scenarios we don't consider sensory. So the first simulation we have 50 patients, and the second have 100 patients, and the third one has 200 patients. So both these 3 scenarios do not have sensory. And the third one we have 200 patients, and we assume we have 23% of the data are sensory. So in this simulation, the truth is we assume the log of the survival time is a mixture of the mixture of 2 normal distributions. So here, we assume it's a mixture of normal distributions. So the general variable or non-logistic regression model will not work. So after generating the data, then we utilize our model on the simulated data. And then we compare our model with the AXT model with random distribution. So in each figure, here the black color is the simulation truth. So we plot a survival function. So the survival curve, the black color is the true survival curve, and the red color is our estimate curve using our non-parametric Bayesian method, DTR model. And the green curve is the AXT model with the level distribution. So we can say our model is very close to the simulation truth. As the number of patients increase, our model is more accurate and better than AXT model. And for the last one, we have 23% of sensory data. So our model, it's not better than as good as with the without sensory case, but it's still very close to the truth and much better than the AXT model. So the second simulation. In the second simulation, we consider a simple example of estimating the treatment effect. So the second example, we only consider one stage. So in our motivating example, we have several stages, right? But here in the second simulation, we only consider one single stage. So here is a simulated example. We assume we have two groups. One is control group, and another one is treatment group. So the black curve and red curve represent the mean response curve of each group. And the dots here, the black dots is our observation in the control group, and the red dots are the observation in the treatment group. So from this figure, we can see the treatment assignment is unbalanced, right? Here, like for patients with the x-axis here is the covariance we consider with like tumor size. So we can say for patients with smaller tumor size, they are more likely to be assigned to control group. Here is a bunch of points here, and less patients in the treatment group. But for the patients with larger tumor size, they are more likely to be assigned to treatment group. So here the treatment assignment is very unbalanced. And then we apply our DTRs model, and also for comparisons, we apply the FTW method and also a linear regression method to estimate the treatment effect. So Peter already introduced the FTW method, and the linear regression is very simple. For each group, we assume it follows a linear regression under all the covariates, and then we calculate the treatment effect from MLE of this linear regression model. The right figure shows the results. Here, the black color is the simulated tree. So we simulated the data, and the treatment effect is 2.5. And the right horizontal line is our estimated results. It's 2.38. So it's very close to the tree. And the light purple one is the result of the linear regression method. So we can say it's highly biased. And the light blue one is the result of the FTW method. And here we can see I draw some vertical lines. So this vertical lines is the 90% credible interval for each observed tumor size. So we can say in this middle region, we have narrow credible interval. It's reasonable because in this middle region, we observe a lot of patients in both groups, so we can more accurately estimate the treatment effect. But in this margin region, so like in this region, most of the patients are from the control group, and in this region, most of the patients are from the treatment group. So we have wider credible interval. Okay. So here I only show the result of the one simulated data. So to show the advantage of our non-parametric Bayesian, I repeated this experiment 1,000 times. So here are the results. The simulated truth is 2.5, and the red curve is the result of the across 1,000 simulations. So we can see our non-parametric Bayesian method is narrowly centered around the simulation tree. And this light blue one is the result of the FTW method. You can see the most it's smaller than 2.5 and it has very large variability. So here notice we have very fair comparisons because we repeat this simulation 1,000 times, and so it's a comparison across 1,000 simulations. And of course, the regression is performed worse. It's here it's the red line and it's yellow line. So the third simulation. This picture is our smoking gun. So the third simulation we simulate the one data set is a vanilla realization of our motivating example. So we have induction therapy. So we assume we have two possible induction therapies, and we have two possible salvage B1 and B2. So we assume we have two possible therapies for each B1 and B2. So we have two possible treatments for A1 and two for B1 and two for B2. So totally we have 8 strategies. And so we have 8 strategies. This figure shows the box plot of our estimated treatment effect and also the FTW results. So the yellow color is our results, and the green color is the FTW results. So this figure, the x-axis is each of the 8 strategies, and the y-axis we plot the difference between our estimates, the difference between the estimated treatment effect and the truth. So here I use a dotted red line to the 0, and we say the yellow color is our results. It's very close to the truth across all 8 strategies, and the green color are the results for FTW method. So we say it has large variabilities and it's more biased than our method. So as we see this result is, it's not surprising because FTW method they only use the covariates to estimate the treatment assignment probability and then they plug in the formula. But our model is not only use the covariates, and we also use the history time for each patient. And also, after we estimate the regression model and we average over all the covariates, it's like we average over the empirical distribution of all the covariates. So I'd like to say our method gets better results than FTW method. So then I show the real data analysis. For the same data set introduced. On this figure, I show the survival curve for the transition time TRD. That means the survival curve for patients who experience resistance first, and then we apply salvage B1 to these patients and they die. So here, the upper left panel is we fix the salvage treatment HDA and we assume the history time, the TOR, the T0R, it means the time from the induction therapy to resistance. So here we assume TOR is 20 days, and here the salvage therapy is non-HDA and the TOR is also 20 days, and here is the salvage HDA and we have over age 55, the 55 days resistance time, and here is another cycle. So, so from these figures we can say when the patient has non-HDAC, it has better survival curve. So here the red curve is, it's higher than this red curve. And also we can say when their time from the induction to resistance, it has longer time, and then this patient has longer survival after the resistance. So here, this figure shows the result of the treatment regime results. So that's the result of Peter and Dr. results. When the induction therapy is FAI, it's performed worse, and it has smaller variability than other 3 induction therapies. And similarly, we get this part, we have the longest mean survival time. So we know the FAI plus ITRA is the best induction therapy. The only difference between our method with Yanxun method is here. They conclude their FAI plus ITRA and other non-HDAC as the HB1 and HDAC as HB2 is the best, but we get different results. We conclude the treatment regime with the FAI plus ITRA as the induction therapy and non-HDAC as the HB1 and non-HDAC as HB2 is the best treatment regime. Okay. So in summary, we propose a non-parametric model to estimate the mean survival time data more accurately. And through simulation studies, we show our non-parametric Bayesian method performs better than the FDW method. And then we use our non-parametric Bayesian model to the real data analysis, and we get these results. Okay. Thank you, Lucia. You have any more to comment? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Thall and Dr. Xu. We're experiencing some difficulties with the camera. We're charging the battery, so we will get back on track for our last presentation. We'll start again with questions from the audience. That will give people through the webinar a little bit more time to type their questions, so you can type your questions on the questions tab over the webinar. And any questions from the audience right now?
Thank you for the talk. I have a question about the diagram. It seems that the patients who relapse will never get CR. Is that just the reality, or is it more of a methodological issue?
Give me your. So that's a great question. The thing about this picture that I drew and handed out to you is that as complicated as it is, it's a simplification. So what Yang has asked is, well, wait a minute, can't they get another CR? And the answer is yes, of course they can. So we could elaborate this picture immensely. You could get a patient, and there are some diseases where a patient will go into remission, relapse, get back into remission, relapse, and go through 3 or 4 of them. Happens in CML and so on. So what I wanted to do was make a picture that was structured enough so that we could capture what was essential, but not so elaborate that we couldn't estimate all the other stuff. So if we had put CR after progression, we didn't have enough information to estimate it, so I left it out. But it's a great question. Another point I want to make about this is looking at the picture is that what I really would like to see is designed experiments where you randomize not just at induction, but you randomize at each of the salvage stages. And if we did that, we would learn much, much, much more about how to treat AML or anything else, because now we have unbiased estimators of dynamic treatment regimes, and we wouldn't have to resort to these elaborate methods.
I have a question. This is a general question about non-parametric base. It seems that non-parametric base is very flexible. So is the flexibility achieved as a price of overfitting the data? Any problem with overfitting?
Oh, so the main advantage of non-parametric Bayesian model is its flexibility. It's really flexible to model the data. So I don't think the non-parametric Bayesian model has an overfitting problem, because here we assume the model is a mixture of unlimited number of normal distributions, right? So we don't know the number of mixtures we need to estimate the data. So actually, from the data itself, and through our model, and we can join the likelihood plus price and posterior. So from the posterior, we have a distribution on the number of normal mixtures. So, here we have a probability distribution. So we cannot say, we cannot say exactly how many mixtures are enough, but we know, like, with how many probabilities, this number of mixtures gives us the best result. So, yeah.
I have a couple of questions. So you said the results you got were the combination of two distributions?
Yeah.
Is that correct? Did you try like 3 or a different number of distributions to go up from there, or?
Oh, we tried more simulations, like 3. Yeah, we tried 3.
I mean, then you go into the issue of overfitting, but I was just wondering if you guys.
Oh, so like for the mixture of 2 normals, actually our posterior estimates will, the posterior model will be 2 mixtures. And if the simulation tool says 3 mixtures, then actually our model will give you, the number 3 is the most probable number of mixtures in our data. So here the
mixture components.
Yeah, mixture component. So here, although our model assumes it's unlimited number of mixtures, but actually the data will tell you how many mixtures will be the most likely number of mixtures. Yeah.
I have one more question for Dr. Thall's part. I just want to make sure I got this correctly. So you said you started out with the 4 randomized trials, right? So you had FAI and then had plus the vitamin A.
Well, there's one randomized trial with 4 arms.
Yes.
And the trial just looked at the frontline.
And then you went into considering all the salvage, all the possible salvage.
Right. I went and revisited the data and asked the people to pull down all the salvage therapies.
Okay. My question is, I'm sorry, maybe I just don't understand, but after you consider all the salvages, you found out that the most significant were where the initial treatment was the FAI with the vitamin A. Is that correct?
And without the GCSF.
Oh, okay. So how did that not show up when you only evaluated the initial treatment?
Well, the initial analysis was done using, let's put it this way, less sophisticated methods. One flaw in the initial analysis was that we didn't do very much model criticism. We fit a Cox model and a logistic model, and that was it. Well, Cox model is not the right thing to fit to begin with. So the inferences in the 1999 paper are wrong at a very primitive level because we made the inferences based on the wrong models. But your question is a good one. That is, in a sense, we're showing the dog has got 4 legs. That is, we concluded, Wyatt and I concluded that the FAI with the actuator without GCSF and some combination of salvages was best. And I think that if we had done an intelligent job of doing the initial analysis in '99, we probably would have seen that. That analysis also relied on p-values and so on that were invalid. So, the additional aspect of looking at the salvages, you see that these credible confidence intervals or credible intervals are very wide. So we're trying to tease out differences in signal in a situation where the signal to noise ratio isn't very big. And so, you can't spin gold out of straw. But I think that the critical issue here is this, that ACTRA should have been pursued. The conclusion of the 1999 trial was wrong. The conclusion of the English trial was wrong. And people should pursue the use of ACTRA in treating AML. That's the real message, aside from statistical technique. And as we speak now, they're not pursuing it, and I think that's a tragedy.
I add a comment. So actually, before I analyze the data using our model, I play around with the model. I consider if we only consider the frontline therapy. Actually, I get the result that the frontline therapy of FAI plus GCSF has the longest survival time. So we see we get different results if we consider the salvage treatment. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Let's get one more round of applause for